It's not on. Now it is. Hooray. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Aquarium of the Pacific. You've arrived at a First Wednesday lecture. I'm your host for this evening. My name's Jenny, and I'm the Aquarium's Vice President of Education and Conservation. We're very excited to have you here tonight in person, but also those folks who are watching online. And you can watch this performance that you're about to see later as well, because we do archive all of our lectures on our YouTube channel. So please check it out, send it to friends, and see what we talked about last month. Tonight, we are talking about frogs. Hooray! Yes! As you're likely familiar, the aquarium renovated its frog exhibits and reopened them about 2 weeks ago. So as an addendum to tonight's wonderful lecture, you'll have an opportunity to explore some of those exhibits. Now, we're here tonight because of some generous sponsors. Those include Stephen and Brenda Olson, the Osborn and Roork Charitable Trust, and Courtyard by Marriott Long Beach Hotel. So we really do appreciate the support of those donors such that we could be here tonight with all of you. Tonight we have a double presentation. So 2 wonderful speakers to share information about frogs with you, and in particular some of the frogs that the Aquarium of the Pacific is working with. I'm going to introduce them both right now, and then they'll come up in sequence. So just keep those biographies in the back of your mind. I'm going to start with our second speaker, who's Dr. Robert Fisher. He is a conservation biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey's Western Ecological Research Center. And his work is focused on the intersection of frogs and people and how those two have interacted and could persist into the future, because we want to avert any future extinctions. And he's really on the forefront of making sure the frogs exist in their habitats into the future. He has degrees from the University of California, Irvine, and from the University of California, Davis. So all institutions right here in our backyard. He is joined tonight by Erin Lundy. Erin Lundy is a staff person here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, and she's got some fans in the audience. That's wonderful. I'm a fan too. She is the manager of conservation initiatives. In this role, she has a really interesting set of responsibilities. She not only gets to work with our amphibian and mammals here in our collection, but she also engages in partnerships with how we are doing conservation in collaboration with those outside of the aquarium. This manifests in things like the Monterey Bay Aquarium Sea Otter Surrogacy Program and our mountain yellow-legged frog project, which you'll hear more about tonight. She also helps in some of the response efforts that the aquarium also participates in through programs such as the Oiled Wildlife Care Network. So making sure that our staff are able to respond when there are animals out in distress, whether those be mammals or birds or other species. She also took on last year being co-host of the Aquarium's podcast. Have you heard of the Aquarium of the Pacific? Let's hear a shout if you have. Okay, good. We have some fans. Hopefully we're generating some new fans. We're currently in season 2, and episodes come out on Tuesday. Spoiler, next Tuesday is going to be about sea lions, so I encourage you to check it out. And when you're talking to Erin after the performance, give her suggestions on what else you'd like to hear about. So with that, I'm going to ask you guys all to turn off your cell phones or silence them, because we really want to be focused in the moment. There'll be an opportunity for question and answers at the end, so earmark those questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Erin to hear more about our frogs.
Hi, everyone. I am so flattered and beyond belief that this many people came to learn about frogs today. I'm very touched. I just wanted to say that before I started. But as Jenny mentioned, my name is Erin Lundy, and I am the manager of conservation initiatives here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. Today, myself and Robert would like to talk to you about the amphibian extinction crisis in our changing world and some of the work that's currently being done to help a local species in peril, the mountain yellow-legged frog, pictured here. First, though, I would like to take you on a journey through your imaginations to the remote rainforests of Costa Rica. Picture yourself hiking through a lush, verdant landscape enveloped by the vibrant greens of the forest. You're gaining elevation as you hike, and you're so absorbed in the symphony of nature around you that you don't realize that you've been reaching the peak of a mountain. You are surrounded on all sides by a thick mist. Or wait, no, these are clouds. What you've entered is the Monte Verde cloud forest in Costa Rica. This extraordinary place is sometimes referred to as an elfin cloud forest, and it enchants with its gnarled, stunted trees and otherworldly atmosphere. It's cool and it's misty here, and you feel a gentle drizzle on your skin. As you venture further, an astonishing sight catches your eye. A small orange toad, about 2 inches long, sitting openly on the path. You continue your walk, and you see another, and another, and another. And gradually, it dawns on you that you are witnessing a rare and magical event, the annual congregation of golden toads gathering together to breed. The golden toad, Encilius peregrinus, was first described in 1966 as a vibrant small amphibian with striking orange coloration found exclusively in the Monteverde cloud forest. This unique habitat is characterized by high humidity and consistent cloud cover, creating a microclimate ideal for many completely unique endemic species, including the golden toad. This species was notable for its bright coloration, which is a form of aposematism or warning coloration, which served as a deterrent to predators to warn them of its toxicity. Golden toads relied heavily on the seasonal rains to create temporary pools that were essential for its reproductive cycle. When the rainy season came, these animals would emerge from underground burrows and congregate by the thousands. Males and females would embrace in a process called amplexus, which could sometimes last for up to 25 hours. Each female toad in this process would lay between 200 and 400 eggs. The vernal pools provided a safe environment for their eggs and their eventual larvae to develop. The presence of the golden toad was an indicator of a healthy ecosystem, reflecting the overall biodiversity and ecological integrity of the Monteverde cloud forest. Though at one point there were thousands of golden toads, these animals inhabited only 4 square kilometers of land in the cloud forest. This land abutted recreational and agricultural land, and deforestation for development and agricultural expansion led to significant habitat fragmentation. The loss of their natural habitat severely impacted their ability to survive and to reproduce. And additionally, pollutants from agricultural activity would run off from the farms during the rain, compromising soil and water quality, limiting the success of toad larvae reaching metamorphosis. In an attempt to preserve the resplendent golden toad, as well as other endemic species, the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve was established in 1972. Though creating a protected habitat went a long way towards preserving this species, the plight of the golden toad wasn't over yet. Over decades, alterations in climate patterns due to climate change disrupted the delicate balance of the cloud forest. Changes in precipitation and temperature patterns led to the drying up of breeding pools and increased the frequency of unsuitable conditions for reproduction. Unbeknownst to scientists at the time, a deadly fungal pathogen known as chytrid fungus, Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis, was also causing widespread mortality in amphibian populations all around the world. For one reason or another, the golden toad was particularly susceptible to this disease, which thrived in the same humid conditions as their habitat. Despite intensive conservation efforts, the last sighting of the golden toad was in May of 1989, less than 25 years after they were first discovered. Researchers who had hoped to find the normal breeding congregation of thousands found only one single male. Subsequent searches yielded no evidence of their continued existence, leading to their classification as extinct. This species was once described as the ghost that haunts Monteverde. Now, you might be wondering why I told you this fairly depressing story about a toad that we haven't seen in 35 years. And while the golden toad is long gone and it only exists now in tissue samples in museum collections, this species is often considered the poster child for what is now known as the amphibian extinction crisis. Some researchers even believe that the golden toad may have been the first animal to ever go extinct as a direct result of climate change. The extinction of the golden toad serves as a stark reminder of the rapid and devastating impacts of environmental change on biodiversity. It highlights the interconnectedness of climate, disease, and habitat integrity. The story of the golden toad underscores the urgent need for comprehensive conservation strategies that address multiple threats simultaneously. Protecting habitats, mitigating climate change, and controlling the spread of pathogens are crucial to preserving amphibian biodiversity. The extinction of the golden toad serves as a grim reminder of the precarious situation faced by countless other amphibian species. Amphibians, comprising frogs, toads, salamanders, and caecilians, are the most threatened group of vertebrate animals on Earth. With over 8,000 known species, amphibians exhibit incredible diversity in form, function, and habitat. And in fact, we are still discovering new species of amphibians to this day. However, amphibians are also on the decline. Since the 1980s, amphibian populations have been declining at an alarming rate. The background extinction rate is the rate at which animals in a taxon would go extinct under normal evolutionary pressures. And some studies have indicated that amphibians may be going extinct at a rate 45,000 times that of the background extinction rate. In fact, 41% of amphibian species are considered threatened with extinction. What this means to me is that we are very likely losing species of amphibians before we've ever discovered them. The decline of amphibians is driven again by habitat loss, climate change, pollution, and emerging infectious diseases such as chytridiomycosis. Chytridiomycosis, which is caused by the chytrid fungus, has been particularly devastating for amphibians across the world. This disease is reported to have caused the greatest loss of biodiversity of any disease in recorded history. The spread of this pathogen was facilitated by global trade and changing environmental conditions, emphasizing the need for better biosecurity and habitat protection measures. Amphibians are struggling, and their situation calls for immediate attention. They are vital to our ecosystems, and the health of amphibians impacts many other species, including our own. Protecting them is crucial for maintaining a balanced environment. So you might be wondering what makes amphibians so crucial. And amphibians provide a lot of what we call ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are the benefits that natural ecosystems provide to humans. Amphibians within an ecosystem can provide several of these benefits. Provisioning services mean that amphibians can act as a resource for us directly. In some parts of the world, amphibians are regularly consumed as a protein source. Additionally, we do sometimes utilize amphibians in medicine and for scientific advancement. We are still studying axolotls to understand how it's possible that those animals can regenerate parts of their body up to 5 times perfectly, including parts of their brain, or why they are 1,000 times more resistant to cancer than we are. An early example of amphibians being used in medicine was actually a pregnancy test in the 1940s and 50s, known as the Hogben's test, that utilized the African clawed frog, Xenopus laevis. What would happen is the doctor would inject the urine of a potentially pregnant woman under the skin of the frog, and if that frog excreted eggs, that indicated the presence of HCG, meaning that woman was pregnant. Amphibians can also provide what are called regulating services. Amphibians eat mosquitoes, and they reduce the prevalence of bloodborne disease by consuming a large number of mosquitoes and mosquito larvae. They may also reduce pests for cropland, and in some cases, some species of amphibians are frugivorous, meaning they eat fruit, and they can disperse the seeds of those fruits as well. Amphibians also provide supporting services, and across the food web, amphibians are able to provide nutrient cycling. They start off their life generally as aquatic larvae that are eating things like detritus and algae, and they are excreting things into the water to provide nutrients for aquatic plants. As they metamorphose, their entire diet changes and they start to eat insects, and they are excreting things into the leaf litter that can support healthy plant growth. Additionally, there have been some studies to show that healthy tadpole populations in waterways can significantly improve water quality by reducing algal biomass and also decreasing sedimentation. Whether you think about amphibians the same way I think about amphibians, they are incredibly important. And in fact, amphibians have been important to people since the beginning of recorded history. Amphibians are omnipresent in mythology, and the axolotl pictured here is believed to be the physical manifestation of the god Xolotl in Aztec culture. Egyptians worshiped the goddess Heket, the goddess of fertility and childbirth, who took the form of a frog. And even more recently, people who play arcade games may know the game Frogger, and younger generations may be more familiar with Minecraft, which recently introduced axolotls in a more recent update, which has made them the most popular animal here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. Even Shakespeare wrote about amphibians in the 1600s when he wrote that a witch's brew would contain the eye of newt and toe of frog. Whether you think about amphibians day to day or not, they are incredibly important to us, and they always have been. You might be wondering now, how is it possible that an entire taxon of incredibly important animals is threatened with extinction? And the answer is that they do share some characteristics that can make them more vulnerable to the things that they're facing in our world. First and foremost, amphibian skin is highly, highly specialized and is something that is fairly unique to amphibians. It is permeable. In some cases, some amphibians actually breathe across the surface of their skin with an entire clade of salamanders called plethodonid salamanders having no lungs at all. The entire surface of their skin functions the same way that our alveoli in our lungs do. And most amphibians absorb water through their skin, especially through a highly vascularized patch of skin on their abdomen called a drinking patch. Unfortunately, though, because their skin is so highly permeable, they are susceptible to a lot of environmental changes and pollution, and chytridiomycosis specifically impacts their skin. Another adaptation or a shared characteristic of amphibians is that they don't go very far from their natural home range. Amphibians tend to evolve and settle in these sort of microhabitats, and although there are some exceptions to that rule, amphibians tend not to deviate. And so if we remove the habitat of these animals, they are not going to go somewhere more suitable. They will just not have a home, and eventually those animals might not do so well. Amphibians really evolved with a lot of different evolutionary pressures than they currently have. I think a really common misconception about amphibians is that they are not adaptable to climatic variations, and that's just not true. Although when you think of frogs, you're probably thinking of tropical species, amphibians live all around the world in incredibly diverse environments, from tropical rainforest where the poison dart frogs may live, to the arid deserts where the Sonoran desert toad burrows for months to escape the heat. And even in the Arctic Circle, northern wood frogs have evolved to freeze through each winter and thaw out each spring. These species have adapted to tolerate climatic variations over millennia. However, climate change presents a different challenge. It disrupts predictable seasonal patterns that the amphibians rely on, drying up breeding pools, causing unseasonal temperature extremes, and altering habitats in ways that can endanger their survival. Now, my last characteristic of amphibians is that most of them have evolved with, again, different evolutionary pressures than they have now, and oftentimes most amphibians have evolved to be poisonous. Amphibians otherwise are sort of defenseless little sacks of jelly, and so in many cases they have evolved a highly toxic poison in their skin. Aposematism, or warning coloration, means that these animals give off a sign that they are poisonous, and predators are generally deterred from eating them. However, this leads me to my last and most important characteristic of amphibians. They are a little bit too cute for their own good. The reason I say this is because this aposematism, this warning coloration, and the bold demeanor that they sort of evolved alongside with it mean that most amphibians are fairly bold. They will sit out in the open, especially the poison ones. They don't think they have predators. But unfortunately, collection for the pet trade has become a major issue for amphibians across the world. The golden mantella pictured here is actually a critically endangered amphibian from Madagascar. There are not that many of these animals left because, similar to the golden toad, they gather in congregations when they're breeding. Collecting animals for the pet trade, especially during these breeding congregations, removes healthy adult breeding animals from the wild populations and can impact their populations as well. Additionally, unregulated international pet trade may be introducing diseases to North America that we had never previously seen. I talked quite a bit about Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis as chytrid fungus, but there is actually another type of chytrid fungus that exists in the world that we have not yet seen spread here in North America. That's Batrachochytrium salamandrivorans, which primarily affects salamanders, but can affect frogs and toads as well. We have not yet seen that disease take hold in North America, but the unregulated international pet trade is very likely to be the vector in which that disease is introduced to North America. So, let's take some lessons from the golden toad and reflect on the tragic story. Unfortunately, with the golden toad, we have already lost this animal. But we can see a stark parallel in the current plight of the mountain yellow-legged frog. This species, much like the golden toad, is considered endangered and faces a multitude of threats. But you can see a lot of very odd similarities between these two species. Both were considered very prevalent in their range at one point, and in fact, mountain yellow-legged frogs were once described as the most populous vertebrate in their range. They are native to high elevation mountain ranges, and although the mountain yellow-legged frogs also were threatened by introduced predators, which were trout, most of their primary threats looked exactly the same. The main and most critical difference between the golden toad and the mountain yellow-legged frog is that although we lost the golden toad in 1989, we still have a chance to save the mountain yellow-legged frog. So, without further ado, please help me give a warm welcome to Robert Fisher to discuss the plight of the mountain yellow-legged frog.
Thanks, Erin. That was really good, and that's a really high bar. We're just transitioning. Oh, you guys can hear me now. Yeah. No, that was a good setup, and thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the mountain yellow-legged frog and the work we've been doing, and a little bit more background about Southern California and some of the more direct impacts and issues for this species. And then, as Erin said, here, the Aquarium of the Pacific is really an important partner in the saving of this species, and you can see these animals upstairs in the new frog exhibit. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge, like, this is a photo from my lab from like 2017, before COVID. And a lot of these people have been working on this frog for decades, like literally decades. And so just want to acknowledge that real quick. And then I also wanted to talk about there's a much broader diversity of amphibians in Southern California, but a lot of them are sensitive or rare as well, like the arroyo toad, the red-legged frog. Here's the yellow-legged frog, and then the western spadefoot, and then some things are much more common. And so we have these as some of the aquatic amphibians. There's terrestrial amphibians, a lot of which they're mostly salamanders, and so some of these occur in the same habitats as the yellow-legged frog. Additionally, we have a turtle that's really rare now in Southern California. This garter snake, which is basically, it's extinct in LA County. It's still in a little bit of Riverside County and San Diego County. And then this garter snake, which is more widespread. And then we have a series of fishes, including steelhead, lamprey. And this fish here, the unarmored three-spined stickleback, is endemic to just LA County. So we have a variety of aquatic species that are all being impacted by various different threats, and some of the same threats that I'll talk about as it relates to the yellow-legged frog. One of the big sets of threats are invasive species, and so we have a lot of aquatic invasive species in Southern California. Some, like the crayfish, were early introductions as part of the bass fishing fisheries. In San Diego County in particular, we had a lot of largemouth bass, which are an invasive, but prized bass fishing in a lot of our reservoirs, and that moved the crayfish around quite a bit, invasive turtles. And bullfrogs is a big one. These are endangered arroyo toads that were pulled out of bullfrog stomachs. So we have a lot of pressures that are tied to these. A lot of other impacts in Southern California, and I'll talk a lot about fire later. This is a wildfire. But these dams, this is water release from a dam. These are some of the impoundments. Here's another dam in San Bernardino County. And so there's just a lot of stresses on these species. Erin did a great job of reviewing that as it related to the golden toad and amphibians in general, and we see that here quite a bit. And then, like I said, it takes a village to do a lot of this work, but also to be effective, we really have a lot of partnerships. And some of these partnerships have been going on for decades, like really for a long time, to try to move the conservation ball forward for some of these species. So the frog story. So basically we started working on yellow-legged frogs in about 1997. And then We had like a working group before they got listed as endangered in 2000. 2002, there was, under a previous administration that started in 2000, there was a stalling of listing of endangered species, and then in 2002, there was like, this was the first species that was actually listed in that, during that administration. And then we continued to move forward with moving animals into captivity, captive breeding, releasing the frogs into the wild. And then in 2012, they were listed by the state of California as endangered. And then we've been expanding this program with additional partnerships ever since. Real quick, this is the range of the frog generally, historically in Southern California. So we're here, the map didn't really come out well. And then these are a lot of the creeks that were occupied by the frogs in the past. And then this is where they currently occurred within the last 5 years. Some of these sites are now extirpated. There's only, go back. There's only one site left in the San Bernardinos. Most of the populations, most of the individuals are in the San Gabriel Mountains in LA County, and then a few in the San Jacinto Mountains. And then this has been some of our restoration work is sites where we're trying to put them back in the wild, or we have put them back in the wild, these stars. And not all of them have been effective or working yet, because a lot of the threats are still in the landscape. So a lot of the places we're working are still experiencing drought or wildfire-related impacts. So I'm going to just step through these different themes from monitoring to research real quick, and then I'll talk about the fire a bit. So, like I said, we've been monitoring these frogs for a long time. These are some of the trends. This is a couple years old, but if you look at the, I keep hitting the forward. Okay, so look at this. This is the number of unique frogs per survey. So like, we were peaking at one site in the low 40s. In 2023, we had a peak at this site, Little Rock Creek, of about 150 frogs per visit. Like the numbers were going really up with all the rains, but also the amount of disease was going up. And then we've had a catastrophic collapse so far we've seen this year in 2024. And so that'll be relevant later as we talk about the frogs that are here. But when you look at this scale, it's in the tens, and this is for the San Gabriel Mountains, the Angeles National Forest. When you look at the San Bernardino National Forest, San Bernardino Mountains and San Jacinto Mountains, we've never had more than 10 individuals at a given site in over 20 years. So we're really struggling to keep animals on the landscape in a lot of these places. I mean, these are really small numbers. A lot of times you just don't even see frogs on a given visit. So knowing that, that's driven research, and then it's driven these conservation activities, and so we'll talk about those in a sec. One of the things we're learning, because we've been doing this work for 25 years almost, more than 25 years, is some of these animals live for a long time. So when we're out monitoring, we're marking individual animals. The oldest animal we've marked has been marked for 21 years. So it might have been an adult or a 5-year-old even when we caught it, so it could be a 26-year-old frog. And remember, Erin said that the other frogs went extinct 35 years ago. So its parents might have been there when there were still golden toads. But like these numbers are amazing. So we're catching animals that have been in that landscape for decades, but we're not catching thousands of young. So there's definitely issues. Like once you get, I guess a George Burns thing, like George Burns said, once you get to 100, nobody dies when you're over 100 because there's almost nobody over 100. So some of these frogs, once they get past a decade, they might last for a long time. And we're just seeing those same frogs. But recruitment back into those sites is really limited. And that's where the captive breeding we're doing here or head starting and is all really important to that. But the age of these frogs is something we've learned, and that gives us a lot of opportunity to try to recover them because they live for a long time. But it also, if we don't do something soon, we'll lose those last old individuals. This is the disease that we heard about from Erin, the chytrid fungus. And this is the amount of chytrid fungus at different sites through time. And so some of these sites peaked, and then the population collapsed. As the chytrid got higher in those individual frogs at that site, they collapsed. Little Rock Creek last year, even though we were getting 150 frogs per visit and some visits, the amount of BD chytrid was going up, and now we think they just died over winter, that we've only seen one adult and one tadpole at that site. So that disease dynamic that we worry about everywhere globally is really a driver here as well. And then we've been doing this genetics to understand how these are the Southern California frogs and how they're related to the Sierran frogs. All of these frogs are endangered, both the Sierran and the Southern California, but the Southern California ones are an evolutionary long branch, and they live in creeks, and they have a different biology than the ones in the Sierran. So if they go extinct, it wouldn't be the same to take some Sierran frogs and then put them down into Southern California. These are preserving some unique like evolutionary adaptations probably to this much more xeric landscape. What I said when we first started working on these frogs was there's less frogs of the southern group left than there are less frogs than there are condors like California condors. There's more California condors than there are frogs. And then I changed that more recently because we were getting hundreds and hundreds of frogs at this one site. But now we're maybe back to that there's more condors than there are frogs in Southern California. There's definitely more populations in the Sierras of frogs than there are frogs in Southern California. And then some of the other research we're doing is on how do we recover these frogs. And using our monitoring data, like I showed, those trends over time and the stochasticity in those trends, we are able to model how many populations we need and how many individuals per population we need so that we have some predictability that they won't globally go extinct after 50 years. And it's pretty rough. You need a lot of frogs at a lot of places, and we're at two handfuls of places that we're struggling to keep them at. So it's a pretty tough world for the frogs at the moment. And with the stochasticity, it's going to continue to be tough. And then recovery actions. So here's where I'll focus the rest of the discussion until I get taken down on the kinds of activities we've been doing to help keep the species in the landscape. First, let's talk about climate for a sec. So this isn't like predicting climate futures, like, oh, in the future it's going to get hot. This is the change in temperature from 2050 to now. And so it's already getting hotter. This is getting hotter. And so it's not that like we have to guess at what it's going to be. It's already on a trajectory of heating up because of the urban heat bubble and a lot of other reasons. And then it's a lot drier than it used to be. This is a paper we did on predicting the extinction of newts in Southern California based on climate variability and drought in particular. And when you see these two lines, this is just rainfall at LAX. So it's not like we're going to get less rain in the future. This is rainfall at LAX from 1946 to 2015 is this line. This is average from 2000 to 2015 is this line. That's a big drop in rainfall during that period of time. And that doesn't even cover the entire drought we had over the last decade. So we're heating up and we're getting less rain. So that makes it even harder to find places to put frogs that live in these high elevation tributary headwater streams. And then some of the things we're doing is we're actually building dams. Before this was wilderness, we were able to bring in material by helicopter, drop it in the Angeles National Forest, and then built this dam to keep trout from, this is on the north side of the San Gabriel, so these are trout that were introduced for sports fishing, but not native to that side. The steelhead are native on the other side, but we tried to create some trout-free zones for the yellow-legged frogs, and so we built these barriers. And then we have the rest of the story, the firestorms. And so I'll talk about fire for the rest of the talk and how that's been driving our recovery activities and challenging these frogs. So this is, if people remember the 2003 events, this is the 2003 firestorms in Southern California. This is the 2007 firestorms in Southern California. And then this is the 2009 station fire. Notice that it's blowing a different direction. So it's now blowing with onshore winds versus the others are blowing Santa Ana driven. So they're blowing out to sea. And so that's an interesting different pattern. Myself, we spent weeks here with the Forest Service as that fire was going to try to strategically figure out what's happening to the biology and what are the mitigation strategies we need to be thinking about. When we started working on fire, we started in the late 90s with control burns and a little bit with wildfires, but really 2003 was where we started really focusing in on fire, my lab, and focusing on these landscape scale fires. And what we did was the fire was in the fall, and then we went out in spring and all the frogs are missing. And so we realized you're missing the dynamic. What's making the frogs go extinct? We don't know because they're just gone by the next spring. So then in the 2007 fires, we spent a bit of time understanding flood and debris flow and how habitat might be changing and geochemistry might be changing. But we also, this is after water was added to the system. So you have the fire and then you have a rain, and we were studying that dynamic with the water. But we realized we were still missing the actual, what happens to fire, to these headwater streams while fire is actually happening. So then in 2009, we spent a lot of time in that station fire, really understanding the water quality, the dry ravel, what ash does to fish, to better understand how fast we need to respond to these events and what might be strategies to deal with them. So this is like 2003, this is City Creek. This was at one point the largest population of yellow-headed frogs we had left in Southern California, and then in 1 year it was extinct. This is where we realized next spring is too late. Like, we have to do something while the fire's still going. This is in 2007. This is what we started to study, the dry ravel. So basically, the landscape here is simple, right? You have plants on a hillside, let's call them organic. And then gravity moves inorganic rocks down, and they get stuck behind the plants. And then when you have a fire, you remove the organic material, the plants, and then gravity pulls those rocks all the way down into the channel, into the creek. And so what happens is you get these funnels that form, and basically when in a small headwaters canyon, the entire habitat that was aquatic now becomes sand and disappears. And so I had a video for you, but it's from 2007, and it won't play. So imagine the hillside falling down. There's an active fire above it, and this is a dramatic video that I took, but I need better technology. And all of this rock is just falling down, and you start getting giant rocks. And it's not after the fire, and it's not with rain. It's while the fire is still burning the organic materials. And then in this situation, here's that pool in June of 2007, before the fire. And it had native trout. This is in the Santa Ana Mountains on the west side. And it had native steelhead trout. And then this is during the fire, before it really burned up that slope. And then this is it now in December. So that funnel was forming. This is that pool. So this is that funnel of material. And then as soon as it got a tiny bit of rain, it just made that pool go to just dirt. And that dynamic is happening really fast. This dynamic of the ash sitting on the water is enough to kill all the fish. And then this video didn't work either. This is This is what happens at the bottom of some of these canyons, and people might remember this is what's called these debris flows. That's why we have these emergencies when there's been a fire and high rainfall. And this is nuts. This is just a street, and the cars have actually been already moved down the street with the debris flow. So like in this video, you can see a mailbox, and it's just dramatic. You can Google that video and find it online. Sorry, I failed. And then coming back to the ash and the work we've been doing, these are trout that are this was Big Tahunga Canyon. And this was while the fire was burning and the ash was sitting on the water. I came back to the same spot. There's hundreds and hundreds of dead trout. Then 3 days later, there was no trout anymore. And so even if we waited until the fire was out, we would have gone out and said, oh, there's no trout die-off. We're not seeing dead trout. We're just not seeing trout. But this die-off from the ash and the water chemistry change is so fast. And then this is Little Rock Creek, the place that had the most frogs. This is all of this material, some of it was still smoldering, sitting inside the pools that the frogs are in. And these frogs, I'll talk about some of the ones we salvaged, are still upstairs in the frog exhibit. And then even turtles, like you wouldn't expect a turtle to burn up, but we even found dead turtles. And so, used to things like deer or bobcat, but it's pretty dramatic. And then when you have human structures in the landscape, they basically melt. This is a trailer park in San Diego that just melted in arroyo toad habitat. And all of this chemistry is going straight into the habitat in the water. And then this is when we did this ash geochemistry. This is just leachate from ash. So these are different kinds of ash from here, the San Gabriel Mountains. So this is residential ash, residential burned soil. And this is called, this is just the pH of the leachate. And so when you compare it to things like liquid drain cleaner, it's like there. And this is ash that's going into the creek in some of these situations. So it's pretty rough. And so that's where, again, we have to be thinking about when the fire's going, what are the things we really need to do and how fast do we need to do them. And then this is the bobcat fire. I need a few more minutes. I'm just worried she's going to tackle me. And so this is the bobcat fire from just, what is that, 4 years ago, so 48 months ago. And these are some of the sites that we were working on with the frogs during that. And then let me zoom in. And so there's, again, the fire footprint. And then Big Rock Creek, which is one of our frog sites. Little Rock Creek, which had the most frogs anywhere ever until, in the recent decades, until this year. All these things are in the fire footprint. Bear Creek, where we had just put 800 frogs out right before the fire burned up. And so it's pretty rough when you're burning up so many sites at the same time. And this is what we've been really kind of tracking the response to. So a lot of people don't drive through fires, but I spend a bit of time in fires. And so this is when we were driving out to first do those assessments in the San Gabriel. So this is still an active event, but we're going through some of the black to get to the sites to make the decision about what to do with these frogs, the frogs that we actually have here, some of those frogs. And having to get the permits and having to argue what's going to happen next at this site if we don't do anything, like what's going to happen to the frogs. And so there's, the fire team does a good job of protecting the structures, which is great. And there are these donut holes that didn't burn within the fire. But it's a pretty dramatic landscape when you're driving through it, because we're driving from one hot spot now into another hot spot to get to different frog sites to evaluate them. And then this is, once we got permission to actually move frogs out of the bobcat fire, this is collecting adult frogs. And so we collected 15 adult frogs. Since it's so late in the year, we were only able to find 15. We had a permit for 30, but we couldn't find them yet. They were already starting to hibernate. And then this is releasing those frogs the next day, basically. at a new site that didn't burn in the East Fork of the San Gabriel River. And this has been our biggest success, where we moved frogs after this fire, the Bobcat fire, and then the next spring, in 2021, they actually laid eggs. And we've never been permitted to do this kind of activity before, this hard release, because everybody was too cautious. And so because of this fire, we actually did this experiment, and that was the best experiment we've done and worked out. This is a backpack bringing some of the frogs out of the habitat. This is the backpack hiking now out of the habitat. This has got the live frogs in it, hiking like 6-8 miles down a canyon to put them into the new site. So it's a lot of work to do this, and you see the frog as we're getting it ready for the release at that site. And then this is the tadpole captures. So these are the 200 tadpoles. So we're catching them in the field. This is those pools that I showed the logs on, the charred logs. This is Adam and Cindy. These are the tadpoles in the bag. The other bags going to the backpack. And then from the backpack into the ice chest. And then these went straight to LA Zoo. And then some of these are now the ones that are here. And then like I said, these are the groups that are working with us on both the frogs, the breeding, and then salvaging these animals out of the fires. And then this is just some of the eggs from, I think this year, from LA Zoo. And then some of these eggs will become tadpoles that come here, and then would be head started into frogs, and then we'll release them. And then these are just some of the data from the last couple of years of the releases we've been doing. And then this is the initial setups we had at the San Diego Zoo when we first started this in 2006, like I said. So these are our first setups. The setups here are like way beyond that because this is an aquarium. And here we were trying to figure out like, what do we need to make the water stay cold? What do we need to do this? This is in a lab. So we've really advanced by getting a lot more partners onboarded. These are some of those first frogs we started with in captivity over 15 years ago now. And then these are the next steps really, is to continue to repatriate at new sites. We're trying to get permission from the forest, the regional forester, to be able to use helicopters in remote areas, in wilderness areas, so we can get access to canyons we can't even hike into. To release frogs. We're still trying to do removal of invasive species. And then we want to expand our breeding facilities, more sites, and have more enclosures that mimic natural settings. So we think we'll have more success. And I'll end with that, everybody. Thanks for your patience. Yeah.
So we have an opportunity for a handful of questions. So if you do have a question, raise your hand. We have some volunteers walking up and down the stairs with a microphone. Ask your question on mic because we do have viewers online who can't hear unless you use the mic. Thank you, Robert and Erin.
Jeez. Go there.
I wore the wrong neck.
Yeah.
Hi. You mentioned moving some of the frogs at the various life cycles from like the San Diego Zoo to the LA Zoo. Why would you move them?
So certain places are set up to do certain things. So we're not breeding frogs here. So here we're just doing head starting. So LA has a setup for breeding, but they don't have the capacity to have thousands of eggs, turning into thousands of tadpoles, turning into thousands of frogs. So they have the capacity to breed them, and then once they're breeding them, then we're moving them to here, to the Santa Ana Zoo, to other zoos, to UCLA. And so by having a set of partners, we're able to divide up those tasks with what people can facilitate.
Also worth mentioning that these tadpoles can take up to 5 years to metamorphose to a frog, and so that process is pretty time intensive. If we wanted to head start a lot of frogs, it could take years.
trade, I I understood that, but how does climate increase the speed of those diseases?
That's a great question, and it's actually something that's still being pretty heavily researched. We don't fully understand the linkage between climate change and chytrid fungus, but one paper that I was reading indicates that it might actually be a change in frogs' behavior rather than necessarily the habitat or the climate or temperature changing itself. And so when these frogs are uncomfortable, they are trying to find a comfortable place to rest during the day if it's too hot, and they will actually congregate and all be touching each other. And so they're potentially spreading chytrid more rapidly in uncomfortable environments because they're all just kind of stacked up on one another, and it can be transmitted skin to skin.
Thank you. We've seen with the golden frogs that environments disappear almost overnight, and we've seen with the fires as well. These mountain yellow-winged frogs are facing many challenges, where 800 burn up in a day. What is, if there is any, a backup plan for if these environments become non-viable, if these very secluded, very small locations become non-optional?
Great. So one of the reasons where, like, we've had this transition from the 60s and 70s and even 80s from smaller fires to these big catastrophic fires for the last 20 years. And so the goal is, that's what that paper is modeling, is like we need 50 places with frogs, not 5 places with frogs. And so that way there's some resiliency that everything doesn't burn up at the same time. And so that's one way forward, but there's a new way people are thinking about how do we manage some of these forest landscapes so we minimize so that, like before it was always suppression. We didn't burn forest. We put out forest fires right away. Then they became too thick, and then we have catastrophic fires. And so there's a change in the fire mentality, and that shift, I think, is going to help have a benefit in what future fires might look like.
Yeah, you guys had mentioned, or you had mentioned about having to get permission to do certain things, and I'm wondering what type of outreach is supposed to be done to government agencies so they understand that some of this is so critical and time intensive, like critical, like is it a matter of like voting a certain way, or is it a matter of just reaching the right people in those organizations?
So for a lot of species they're working at here at a lot of institutions, there's like there's a risk involved. Like if we're gonna do this, there might be this risk. Like the animals might die from us moving them or putting them in the ice chest or whatever. So that risk, like for conservation, there's a lot of people that are risk averse. They're afraid to do something because that's all you have left. And so our permits were a bit conservative in what they allowed us to do because of that risk. And so once we could show that like we're past like a point, like then it was like, okay, let's do this because we're maybe not gonna have another option. So like moving adult frogs was never something we could get permits to do. It was just only to harvest tadpoles. But because that was such an extreme event, we were able to navigate that. I had to fill out the paperwork for the state to do it. Like we got it fast tracked because it was going to be snowing, basically. And so, but it was a lot of education of people up the chain to get to those permissions. Yeah. And so now I think we're in a place where we showed experimentally it works. It'll be easier next time.
I have a question. You mentioned that it takes a village to do this. We are your village as well. What can we do as a society to help with this cause and save the frogs and the toads and all the amphibians?
Right. So I think you guys. I mean, you're here, like you're here, right? But I think it's a lot of it's resources. There's not, like having the funding for the aquariums, having the funding to do the research, the monitoring, having volunteers help educate people. One of the places we work is a really, really popular rock climbing area, and the rock climbers would literally stand in the only pools that had the frogs to start climbing. So there was an education about, can we put in some boardwalks or something. So like it's trying to kind of educate people about why you might not be able to do something in public lands because there's this other, so I think there's a variety, a scale of different things, ways you could help, for sure.
I think, one, being here today, like I said, I'm so touched to see how many people came to learn about how to help amphibians and what's going on with them. Unfortunately, there's really no preservation of amphibian species without preservation of their habitats as well. And so doing everything you can to minimize your impact on this world and, making smarter food choices can go a long way. Voting with your dollar, not contributing to things that are going to contribute to agricultural expansion. Eating less meat is one that we actually can do as consumers. We can vote with our dollar in that way. But unfortunately, amphibians are so in tune with their environment that they're going to be at risk as long as our world is at risk of all the changes that are currently happening. So education, number one, is wildly important. Also, using apps like iNaturalist and Citizen Science can be wildly helpful to gather some data on where these animals are and help scientists be a little bit more informed on what populations might look like. But if you are going out, please do not handle these amphibians because they do have diseases that can spread to one another.
The other thing is, it's like we're working on removing trout from certain places where people want to have fishing resources, but we've had to identify that those trout weren't native to those places and nobody's fishing in those places. You can't even hike to those places. And so there's an education piece of getting people to align. And with this frog, it's mostly on public lands, which is weird, and yet we're still losing the battle. So it's that's where it's really hard in these landscapes where species aren't on public lands, and we're trying to figure out how to coexist with them. Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering for undergraduate students and aspiring professionals in general, if you have advice on getting involved in a career in amphibian or wildlife conservation.
Yeah, I think some of it's just volunteering, like trying to get engaged in a program through here or however, through my team, and a lot of the people that work on our crew were volunteers. So I think it's just trying to look for those opportunities, and then getting figuring out what you like, and stuff. But a lot of times you can't get this kind of knowledge through just school. Like you can't. You have to be out doing stuff, and so I think mixing what terminal school degree you want with getting some actual experience is really critical.
Thank you very much for that enlightening and somewhat depressing talk.
Oh, right. There's that. There's drinks afterwards. Yeah. Yeah.
That'll make me clear. So my question is about the captivity breeding program. It seems like it's been pretty successful getting these animals to breed in captivity. Are the populations safe as long as we can continue to breed them? In other words, can we continue to see them in the wild even if they continue to fail?
No, that's a really critical question. So like the LA Zoo produced 3,000, 5,000 eggs this year, like eggs. And then there's a loss as you get to tadpoles. And then what we need is more places to get them to adults in captivity. Because we've done experiments with eggs, putting eggs in the wild, tadpoles in the wild, and the success rate is highest with adults. But there's also a lot of disease still in the wild. So there's this research aspect where we have to understand how to benefit the adults, give them some resiliency through potentially beneficial bacteria ahead of time. When we put them out there, they can deal with the fungus. So it is successful, but it's also we're seeing this catastrophic die-off this year, which we kind of thought might happen, but we didn't know, So it's definitely, there's still a learning curve on exactly what we can do to take, thousands of eggs and actually have success with thousands of frogs. Yeah.
If there's something we can do to help these frogs more resilient to the chytrid fungus and other pathogens that they're facing right now?
Yeah, and what we think, my team thinks, is that the frogs that didn't die off that are still at Little Rock might be more resistant. So it could be that those would be the ones that we could have better success with.
Interesting, thank you.
Yeah.
Noticing that there's a pause, I'm going to suggest that we adjourn for this portion of the evening, but there's certainly opportunity to ask additional questions to Robert and Erin, who will be milling about the spaces after the event. But first, let's give them a nice round of applause for a wonderful talk. We hope that you have the opportunity to join us for our future First Wednesday. And coming up next in July, on July 3rd, we are going to continue our theme on amphibians. And we'll be talking about newts and salamanders with Dr. Lee Katz, who's with Pepperdine University. This evening is particularly special because we're opening parts of our gallery for you to see some of these frogs right here at the aquarium. So if you are interested in seeing mountain yellow-legged frogs, you will locate those at the top. So you'll exit the stairs at the top. These are small exhibits, however, so I do encourage some of you to exit to the bottom to start and find the bar and Dr. Fisher and some craft activities. There are digital craft activities in both locations. We have a Paint a Frog installation upstairs that joins our Paint a Fish downstairs. So please use the theater as your vehicle for getting from place to place. So if you need to go upstairs after you grab your beverage, come back inside here. And thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight, and have a great rest of your evening.
I don't want to be carrying that around.